Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
You're welcome along to Monday Night Rugby here on Off the Ball, and we are of course reacting to Ireland's devastating defeat at the hands of Wales at the Principality Stadium on Saturday for the next half an hour or so. Brian O'Driscoll is with me in studio. How are things?
Things are good.
Things are better for you, I'd imagine, on Saturday afternoon when you're actually managing to avoid the game. You're in Rome, keeping track of how things are going desperately wrong for Joe Schmidt's side.
Yeah, I obviously did the Italian-French game, the big one, and then got in a cab and went to an Irish bar in the centre of Rome and caught the second half and watched it with a Welsh choir and Shane Williams and his wife.
I'm sure that was delightful.
Easy viewing that was. Easy viewing. There was no patronising comments whatsoever. But you got to take it. You got to take your beating. You know, when you're put to the sword the way we were, beaten in every facet of play, you just have to shut up and compliment them and take your punishment. But it's funny when you're following something. You know, I didn't even know the game had kicked off when we were 7 points down. We were literally walking down from the studio with Gareth Thomas, and he said, "There's a try already." I was like, well, I didn't know. I thought there was a game kicking off in 10 minutes. So I'm looking back then, having watched the game yesterday, looking back retrospectively on that first half. Like, against any good side, you can see the try within 70 seconds. That takes the wind out of your sails, just as it did against England. But Ireland literally never got back into the game. They got out-muscled, they got... their set piece got dominated. They got out-thought. Wales had an answer for every power play that was thrown at them. Kicked poorly. It was a really disappointing performance from Ireland and some individuals on the whole. And yeah, that must have been. I tell you what, I didn't envy them as being rugby players on Saturday. I was more than happy to be retired, knowing what would coming the next day, the trip back home. And that disappointing, everything that you have to carry with you. It's one of the less glamorous parts of being a professional sportsman. Yeah,
at the end of a championship as well. There is no next week.
No chance to put it right. No chance to put it right. Next game is a pre-World Cup warm-up game. So it's a long time to wait. You're not even getting a summer tour, so you got to wait till August ultimately. And a little bit of soul searching and wondering, where did it all go wrong? But I don't know if I'm as negative as take that game in isolation. Yes, we've been on the decline since that incredible performance from the All Blacks against the All Blacks. But I genuinely don't see Joe Schmidt pressing panic buttons, and I don't see players pressing panic buttons. It almost seems as though they just need a break from it now. Right, like just park that, go back to your clubs, just start enjoying that, a new voice and everything, and then we'll pick it up again in the summer and we'll work really hard towards it, and we'll have almost a fresh start of sorts, because they are not what we've seen. They're not the calibre of team that we've seen over the last 7 weeks. They're much better than that. They've proven it to us, consistently for 3-4 years. So I feel as though they fix a few things, get one or two individuals whose stock has gone through the absolute roof back playing, and I don't think they'll be a million miles away from competing with those teams that they've lost in the Six Nations.
Right, because my whole sense of it was that the England game could be kind of seen as a hiccup at the start of the championship, and then you had a couple of iffy performances, particularly against Italy, and in France things looked like they were back on track to a certain extent. But then last week, it certainly seemed to me that the things were more than a hiccup. There are deeper problems here. Would you still go along with that?
Yeah. I look at there was a really, really disappointing performance against Wales. They never got going. And it felt as though they were coming back against France, even though they didn't hit particularly lofty heights. But they've been pretty much humbled now by that Welsh team, and with so much at stake, and with the Gats v Joe scenario, both of them finishing up their Six Nations, and with an opportunity to still probably finish second, best case scenario, finish second in Six Nations. That was a carrot in itself, and deny Wales a Grand Slam, a team that Ireland has had plenty of niggle with over the course of the last 10 years or so. So there was no shortage of motivation, but they literally just never got out of second gear, and they were beaten up physically. I thought They were dominated in the collision zone. They were dominated at the ruck, an area that I think has been a real have digressed since last year in particular. I think if you're going to play, the ruck game and the possession game, you've got to be absolutely lethal there. To make sure you continue having fast ball. I think our quality of clear out hasn't been as good. Teams have worked us out a little bit more. Maybe aspects of our power plays, teams are doing more homework on us and they're able to nullify them, even though there's a big playbook of them. It just feels like there's a need of freshening up, and I think that freshness is going to come from a break from international for these players.
Right. Is there like something more kind of less tenuous, I guess, when it comes to actually freshening things up? Like, what can you actually do? Is the break going to be enough to actually turn this around? Because it seems that we're in a pretty bad depth at the moment, and trying to pick yourselves up from that. Is a break really the only thing that's going to help?
Well, it's the only thing that they can do because there's no games. So it's deal with what the scenario offers itself. You're not going to get to be back in national camp until after the summer holidays. They won't even get a weekend together, I don't think, until they finish up with their provinces. So go back there and try and play for European honours and individually get your confidence back up a little bit, because a few players will have had their confidence shot a small bit over the last couple of months. So go back and try and play their way back into some form, and then holiday well, and then it's also a mental switch to be able to turn it on for what is going to be the biggest 6 months of their lives.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Ireland's game plan, because it's been spoken about quite a bit over the last 24-48 hours. And Liam Toland had an interesting line in the Irish Times this morning. He was making the point basically that for the Welsh game plan, they don't really require the same levels of perfection that the Irish game plan requires, that the Irish players need to be on it and close to 100% to actually make the Schmidt game plan happen, whereas there's a bit more room for error in how Wales set up. And you've got an open roof and you've got tons of rain, that area for perfection is kind of less.
Well, let's talk about that first, because I don't understand. There's two lines of thought on this. By deciding it yourself as to what's going to happen and keeping it open, you take that decision away from Wales, something that they have no ownership over. So is that a win? Maybe it's a small win, except you have to play in the conditions that you're then given. But I'd be more of the thought that this Irish team has shown over the course of the last 12 months, 18 months, that they like playing with ball in hand. They're a possession team. They brought France through 42 or 43 phases and dropped a goal at the death. So they're very comfortable playing with the ball. What's not conducive to playing with the ball is a greasy surface and rain and horrible conditions. So it almost takes away from where they've gone to with their game plan. Also, add on top that Wales have notoriously have this hammer defence and were the first to properly bring it in. It's not without its frailties, but yet when you have rainy conditions, that absolutely plays into their hands. So I didn't get the decision knowing that the rain was coming, that it was going to be a battle, and that obviously Joe felt as though his pack was, very equal to matching or better than the Welsh pack, and that confrontation game was right up his street. I just felt that, before the game kicked off, I felt that was a bad decision, because back your skill level. Back at that, Wales always back their skill level. They think they're very good passers. Joe Schmidt has always said, I want to be the best passing team in Europe. I'm sure he's saying to his international team, to his national team now, I want you to be the best passers in the world. So back your skill set. They carry through phases reaching the 20s and 30s a lot. So why all of a sudden would you want a wet ball and want to make it about an arm wrestle? I don't think that those things add up, and I think that was the first error. The second part is, in all Joe Schmidt's game plans, the kicking game is very important, and it was very disappointing. It was, Johnny didn't have his best game. I think, which we all identified from relatively early on. He wasn't on it. The communication wasn't there. It wasn't going his way. But we have to be able to kick contest. When have we been successful? We've gotten our kicks back, or we've squeezed pressure. That seems to have vanished from our game over the course of the Six Nations. So that's definitely an area I think needs big fixing. those power plays, we saw a couple of tries, Keith Earls against France, we saw Jacob Stockday against Scotland. But power plays are going to be pretty difficult to cut teams open in really greasy conditions. Rain and mud is a leveller, where wingers all of a sudden don't have that turn of speed against, back rowers or front rowers, where it reduces everyone down to a similar sort of level. So it becomes about who's up for the fight, and Wales weren't lacking in motivation for winning their third Grand Slam in Gat's tenure, and the confidence that'll give them bringing into the World Cup. So I think there were. All's not lost, but I think there were definitely some really disappointing aspects to what happened at the weekend, and from a selection point of view as well.
Just on our kicking game, did Joe Schmidt leave our halfbacks on too long?
Probably. It's a tricky one, because both of them are not playing anywhere near the level that we're used to. Connors seems to be trying to play his way through an injury. I don't know. He's the only one that really knows how much it's bothering him. Johnny's definitely had a dip in form that I don't think he's encountered in his career previously. So it's trying to give them the confidence to be able to play through that, but then don't cut your nose off to spite your face. You've got to be able to look at the bigger picture of it's not working for the team, therefore we need to bring in some fresh faces. I do think that if Joey Carberry was on the bench, he might have been introduced a little bit earlier than Jack Carty. It was only his second cap. He's a nice player, but he's not Joey Carberry. Conor Murray, again, it's similar. Even though Kieran Marmion's played well for Connacht in recent weeks and has never disappointed for Ireland, there's still a gulf between the two. So I think Joe's trying to give him game time to be able to get that confidence back, which just doesn't seem to be coming. So the only alternative now is that he gets a break from it like everybody else and goes back to his provincial team, and hopefully he gets a bit of rest time or whatever's necessitated to allow himself to be close to 100% fit come World Cup time.
When you say there that Johnny Sexton's never encountered a dip in form like this, how low is this, and how low has he previously got to this? Has he been anywhere near this ballpark in terms of a dip in form? Not
consistently over the course of a 2-month period. Like if you go back to when he picked up his injury against Munster, he didn't have a good game. I don't remember the games before that in December. None of them stood out as being poor games. So ultimately that was a marker for Johnny didn't play well. He was captain, he lost the head a small bit. Then he had a big period out, didn't play great against England, and then didn't play particularly. He played fine against Scotland for 20 minutes that he was on. Actually played well, drew them in, took those hits, did the necessary. So had the makings of a good game before he was carted off. Didn't play great against Italy. Played better against France, but not quite to Johnny Sexton standards. But then a disappointing game against Wales. So for him to fluctuate up and down like that is very unusual. He kind of has a baseline standard of pretty good quality, of kind of 7 out of 10 is his baseline, and then all of a sudden he's having a bit more of a fluctuation, and this is new to him as much as it's new to all of us. I've never seen that over the course of the last 10 years since he burst onto the scene. So I'm sure he's battling with it a small bit in his own head, and his coach as a result is battling with the fact that his most important player is not firing for him.
And that's the thing. And like you look at the restart that he put out in the full that everybody's talking about from Saturday. Ireland get a penalty a few minutes later to kick it into touch. Conor Murray takes the kick. Now Sexton may have picked up a little knock. We're not sure, but you do wonder if there's a confidence issue underlying all of this, and he usually is a guy who's so determined, who's able to pull up that performance again. But as you say, he hasn't encountered this before. Does he have the reservoir of confidence to turn this around?
Like if you think back to the confidence that it took to knock that drop goal over this time last year or 13 months ago, like he also had the wherewithal to know that his team was going to knock the ball on in the next 7 or 8 phases if he didn't pull the trigger, if he didn't fire a shot. So he does like that pressure, but when things don't go for you, maybe you go into your shell a small bit, and maybe you don't want to take on the bigger decision or the more stressful scenarios to find yourself in. One thing that I found very unusual, I know Ireland do it an awful lot in going to the corner and backing themselves in their maul, but I think it's an error if they think going into a World Cup game, a World Cup quarter-final against South Africa or against New Zealand, that, you know, if they're 5 or 7 points down, that they can't keep the scoreboard ticking over themselves, that they can go for 7-pointers and get them the whole time. I don't understand why they turned down the 3 points when it was 10-0. Get something on the scoreboard, build your confidence that way. You go to the corner, you get turned over in the maul, and they relieve pressure, and that's a double whammy. You've obviously coughed up, given up 3, but also you've given them a big shot in the arm of confidence that they're well able to match anything you throw at them. So I think they definitely have to review that policy. It might work for you in the lesser games, but against bigger and better opposition, you'll be regretful of it. And sure enough, they were. Yeah, like the thing that Joe Schmidt is obviously so well renowned for is his ruthlessness when it comes to decisions. We saw it with Sean Cronin a couple of weeks ago. We saw it with Sean O'Brien. It lasted less than 10 minutes of the second half on Saturday. And that's why I asked initially, should they have been taken off earlier? Like, do you think if, and I know it's a big if Johnny Sexton's form continues to stay at a fairly low level going into the World Cup, can Joe Schmidt actually make the decision to say, listen, Johnny, you're coming off and Joey's going in? No one's irreplaceable. No one. Johnny Sexton included, Conor Murray included. You can't, you've got credit in the bank for delivering for long periods, but also, that only entitles you to a hiccup or two. And if you don't get back to that level and someone else is capable of performing at a higher standard than that, well, that's an obvious choice. And Joe Schmidt's not afraid of that decision. What would be really interesting would be if Joey Carberry was fit next week, if there was a game, who would start. And it's getting, at the moment, it's getting to a place where you mightn't be fully sure, but I know the calibre and the person that Johnny is as well, and he will be beating himself up. But he will continue to back himself as well, and feel as though he can absolutely, pick himself up, pick his game back up, and start by, getting Leinster to a Champions Cup final and getting them to a Pro 14 final, and with successful teams, your confidence comes with that. So that's the only way he can go about his business. Continue working hard and try and get it to fit. And maybe a different voice. Maybe he needs to go back to Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster and something that he can't see right now, that he just needs to tweak or change, or maybe needs to just chill out a small bit. I don't know. I haven't been in touch with him, so but I feel for him because this is not Johnny Sexton that we've come to expect, and now he just needs to find a way to dig himself out of the hole.
When it comes to all the players, there were some interesting quotes from Andy Dunn on Off the Ball on Saturday. He says, "I'd nearly absolve all the players of blame. I think the coaching staff are far too oppressive and far too dictatorial about the style of play," which is a pretty strong line. He says there are great players that are not being given enough scope to be creative, and that's the same in any walk of life. In business, if you don't have high-level management that aren't allowed to be creative or express themselves, it doesn't work. Is that something that Johnny Sexton needs, and the team as a whole needs, to kind of get out of something that could be kind of referred to as a tactical straitjacket?
But Johnny Sexton doesn't just peddle what Joe Schmidt says. He challenges him, and he questions everything that's put to him. Now, he's lucky in that his coach he's huge respect for him, and a lot of the ideas that are put his way that Johnny would probably be of a similar mind. But it doesn't mean that Johnny's a lapdog, that he just takes on board everything that's pushed forward from Joe, and he goes, oh well, this will work. Yes, Joe's game plans have worked in the past, but maybe there needs to be a small bit of a rethink. Maybe they do need to evolve a small bit, that they have become a bit prescriptive and a bit too easy to defend. The other thing as well is what has happened since the All Black game. So what did Ireland do really well? They got off the line. They were phenomenal. They didn't think about drifting off at any stage. I don't know too many occasions where I saw someone pushing from one defender to another and making that tackle. It was just man on, straight up. And what happens when you do that against a side like the All Blacks and you're successful, then others do the exact same thing to you, where they know that if you shut down the space, no team wants to have their time limited and their decision-making process limited. They want to have plenty of it. You look back to the All Blacks against the Lions when they were able to shut them out in that second test. They just got in their faces. So that's what Wales and England have ultimately done, and they've just stifled them in attack, and they've had no answers. So they need to go back and have a little bit of a rethink. Maybe they need to kick a bit more. Maybe they need to kick a little bit better, and maybe it'll come together more. But I do feel it's funny. We're talking about a one-off game where, well, it's not a one-off game. We're talking about a game where it's obviously the outcome's very disappointing, and the manner in which it's happened has been very disappointing. But you have to remember too, nothing has gone for Ireland in this game. Nothing at all. And even to the point, and I by no rationale am I accusing the referee of or having him skewing the result in any way. That was going to happen one way or another. But I think they got on the wrong side of the referee, and there were a couple of questionable decisions. I'd really like to see Joe Schmidt's letter to Angus Gardner or to the referees. I'm sure it would not be on one page, because it did feel as though there were some harsh calls. One or two. I remember seeing Navidi getting harshly penalised for coming off his feet on one occasion when Tygburn jumped out of committing to a ruck. So it went both ways. But I do feel that there are things that can be fixed in all of this.
Yeah.
It's not. This is not terminal. I think some of those comments are a bit extreme. I think we've lost 3 games in 24. Like, it's worked really well for large parts of the last 2 years. Why do we need wholesale change just because we're having a bit of a stutter? Maybe you modify it slightly and you incorporate some new plays that no one has seen before, which I'm sure Joe will do. I think we could be a very, very different team and bring back some important players. Like I mentioned earlier on, Devon Toners all of a sudden becoming an invaluable player to this team.
Like, did anybody have their reputation enhanced from the Six Nations campaign?
I think enhanced. I think Gary Ringrose is probably when he's played. He hasn't played a lot, but he's still been pretty good. Devon Toners in his absence, Dan Levy's reputation have been enhanced, but that's probably it. I was looking at different teams of the Six Nations, and there's one person had James Ryan in it. But he was the only Irishman to feature in anything that I saw. So, and yet we finished 3rd. You would have imagined, like, Dupont was even on most people's teams, and France finished 4th. So to not get one player on shows that no one really stood out at any stage, even in our better victory against France. Listen, there is some soul searching to be done for sure, but it's not terminal.
Joe Schmidt, I wonder what he's thinking now. Like, I mean, when I say at the start that there is no next week from an Irish perspective, of course there isn't. We've got to wait a couple of months. But at least from an individual player's perspective, they can put on the provincial jersey and all that sort of thing. Whereas with Joe's situation, I'd imagine it's going to be quite a long 6 months where he doesn't actually have the team going out in competitive action to try and arrest this thing. Like, when he's looking at what to do, is he thinking to himself now, we need to go back to what we do well and do it better than we've ever done it before? Or is he thinking plan B, let's get a new way of working?
Well, those 2 areas I talked about, at the ruck and targeting the ruck better and being more clinical there, I think they can get better at that. And I think their kick game, I think if you sort those 2 areas out, the rest will evolve, and then he can add on some components that I'm sure he has up his sleeve for the World Cup that he's been holding back, or some plays that he feels will work against the likes of Scotland that maybe they didn't show over Murrayfield a few weeks ago. Listen, Joe's a great tactician, and I think he'll hate it and he'll enjoy the next 6 months because it's a long time to wait to try and put that right, but he's a real student of the game, and he'll go away and try and find some plays that will pull apart the different opposition we have in the group stage, and then be it South Africa or New Zealand, plays that will work because he'll have studied dozens of hours of tape on each team and identified what their systems do in defence.
Like, when he's looking at personnel then, do you expect any wildcards coming into the World Cup? Because we predicted our World Cup squads at the start of the year and it seemed fairly set in stone with regards to, with the exception of a couple of positions. Whereas now, does it blow the whole thing open again?
I don't think it blows the whole thing open, no. I think there's probably a few peripheral players that were gone from his reckoning in his 31-man squad that maybe have eked their way back into reckoning, depending on what happens with them provincially towards the end of the season and whether they get some game time in August. but you would anticipate that he has a fair idea what his squad's going to look like. Those players have not become bad players over a 3-month period. They simply haven't. And I don't know. It's funny, at times I feel the need to defend the team because I understand that success and failure, it's never so great when you're winning and it's never so terrible when you're losing. So the gap between the two can often be a very, very minute space, and all of a sudden if you fix one or two things you can leap from one to the other, and I do feel as though that's where this team is. So I feel the need to defend them a little bit because it's, nothing's really gone for them this Six Nations, and yet they still won 3 games.
Yeah, like in that regard, it's certainly a positive, and I think the sounds coming from the camp afterwards were actually relatively positive as well. Like you look at Tyg Burns' comments afterwards, he says, I think definitely we stick to what we know and what we've done in the past, we'll definitely be able to improve. It's probably about finding our feet again and putting in those performances. And then Gary Ringrose referred to it as a really good learning opportunity, that they are speaking, let's admit it here, in the immediate aftermath of a game here, they're hurting and they're still coming out with these phrases that actually we're going to take this and learn from it. So maybe we are being a little bit OTT, or I don't know. It's certainly the Irish camp isn't as grim as we're making it out.
But listen, I do believe, and as a player I always thought there was no real place for middle ground. We loved being top of the tree or bottom of the barrel, and I've said it a few times, and we possibly lost the run of ourselves. We definitely lost the run of ourselves after the All Black game, and now why do all of a sudden does it have to be the ends of the world that we've lost 2 games? You could go out and win 3 or 4 warm-up games. Have we got 4 warm-up games? And you could win all your pool matches and win a quarter-final, and all of this will be forgotten. Ireland get to a semi-final, all of this will be forgotten.
Do you really think that we can say that the semi-final is as realistic a possibility as it was 2 months ago?
I think it is, yeah. I think it's still as realistic.
So your confidence hasn't actually been checked that much by what's happened?
No, not that much. It was still going. By the way, it was still going to be incredibly difficult. Playing against a South Africa or a New Zealand in a quarter-final. They both have great World Cup records. We don't. So irrespective, and all the pressure was going to be on us with the expectation from back home. Now that's gone. I don't think that's the end of the world. But no matter what, it was going to be a brutally tough game against likely South Africa. That hasn't changed. Maybe they have a bit more confidence in being able to get the better of us, knowing that there's a template there from particularly what England did to us, and then subsequently what Wales have done over the weekend, of just out-muscling us and beating us up physically and putting huge pressure on our halfbacks. But if you flip a few things and you get guys playing with a little bit more confidence, I think that changes that needle. That just flips it ever so slightly, and that is ultimately what the margin between winning and losing in a quarter-final is going to be. We're never going to beat South Africa by 25 points in a quarter-final like we did 2 years ago in the Aviva, or higher. What was it, 35 points or something we scored against them? That's not going to happen in World Cup. If you're going to win a quarter-final, you're going to win it by a score. So, and if you're going to lose it, it's probably going to be by the same. So, not a whole lot has changed from that point of view, only the perception of the man on the street that all of a sudden we've gone from world beaters to being a crap team again.
Are we better without expectation on our shoulders?
Well, we've never had expectation going into World Cup. Sorry, I lie. In 07 we had, and that unravelled before we got there because we realised we were undercooked from not handling a ball for 7 weeks, where we realised that we're in trouble in advance of actually getting there. That won't happen to this team. So the expectation of a country will probably, from a player's perspective, the scrutiny and everything that comes with that, I would say now that it's not a bad thing that all of a sudden we're playing down our chances of getting into a semi-final. I think that will suit us well because it's what we're used to.
Yeah, like the 07 thing was obviously mentioned by Shane Horgan on Virgin a couple of weeks back, and it got great fanfare, those quotes. Like, does it actually have a material effect on your performance, the level of scrutiny outside the camp?
Yeah, but I don't think necessarily all of what was said in 07 within the camp wasn't necessarily true, or wasn't true. You know, there was all sorts of rumours. We were nervous because we knew it ourselves that we weren't ready. And it was very frustrating because we wish we could go back, you know, to the start of pre-season and start getting balls out when we were doing our running drills and passing under pressure and passing under fatigue, whereas all of that came very late, and it felt as though we weren't at that same skill level as all the other teams, particularly Argentina and France were in our pool. We had to be at that. So it felt like our ball handling conditioning wasn't there, whereas our physical fitness conditioning might have been, and our size might have been, a big element wasn't there. And so that has a confidence dent. And as a knock-on effect to things tightening up and things going badly. And then there were some, other issues within Bordeaux that didn't work out for us. You know, finding ourselves in an industrial park, doesn't help your cause when you're not feeling great and you're trying to have a good time, but it's not conducive to that. So all those things feed each other. Whereas those issues won't happen with this team. Irrespective of what happens to them provincially at the end of the season, they'll go away on a 3 or 4 week holiday and they'll come back together and they'll be in camp together. And they'll have to think some clever ways to make sure that they don't get stale in those camps, because it's a long period from, the end of June right through to October if you want to win a World Cup. It's a long period, so they'll have to get their thinking cap on. But I think they will ultimately feel that if they're capable of beating the best team in the world within the 12-month period of a World Cup, they're capable of finding that form again. For
sure. We should also mention Wales, of course, who did beat us and played brilliantly on Saturday. Is there a situation for them now where you look at the mirror image of perhaps England in 2003 going into a World Cup on the crest of a wave that is the Grand Slam?
Yeah, but maybe that suits them a little bit better. Maybe they're a team that have always worked on, from a confidence point of view. Gatland has always driven that confidence into them, talked them up as being, a very skillful team, one of the most skillful teams in the world, maybe after New Zealand, the fittest team in the world. So I think it's unfair to say that he brainwashed them, but he definitely consistently said the same things to them to remind them that that's where they're at. And I think that feeds into their psyche and has worked for them in the past, where they genuinely feel that's the level that they're at. Whereas I'm not saying necessarily that works for us. It works for England as well. They're a confident team, and they were able to take that forward. That said, England were a drop goal away from losing a World Cup, and we wouldn't be talking about it. So again, and I keep coming back to a margin thing. They are so tiny between getting things right and being a little bit off, and that's why it doesn't have to be the end of the world when it doesn't go great.
So the overall Brian O'Driscoll consensus is that relax, chill out a little bit. It's not as bad as we're making it out.
No, I don't think it is. I really don't think it is, and I do feel. I know Joe, and I know those players. Most of those players, I've played with a lot of them, so I've so much trust in them. And having watched them grow over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, and evolve as players and tick boxes, where all of a sudden now those pressurized situations won't be the same as it would be, if they were encountering them for the first time. That I really feel that they're better served come this World Cup. That they're lucky that they've earned themselves a good pool. Even though Scotland now look like world beaters. But Japan, host nation, be the other tricky game in that pool. But if you're not going to beat those two teams, you're not winning a World Cup. So the reality is they should find themselves in a World Cup quarter-final against South Africa. I bet you Joe Schmidt's doing a hell of a lot of work on South Africa and watching them over the course of the next 3 or 4 months as they play Rugby Championship.
I don't think there's any question about that. Before we let you go, we should tell you that we've got an absolute can't-miss show coming up for you if you're a Leinster fan or any kind of rugby fan, really. On Wednesday the 27th of March, we're going to be live from the Olympia for the first off-the-ball roadshow of the year in association with Heineken Rugby Club. On the night, we'll be talking to the man who masterminded Leinster's progression from European contenders to the dominant force they've now become. 2009 Heineken Champions Cup winning coach And now current Wallabies coach Michael Cheika will be joining us alongside some of the key members of that 2009 team. And we'll also be previewing the rest of the Heineken Cup quarter-finals. Tickets to this are now going to disappear fast, so get on to offtheball.com/events now to avoid disappointment. And remember, you need to be over 18 to come along. It's the latest Off the Ball Roadshow in association with Heineken Rugby Club. Brian, good to have Michael Cheika back in Dublin.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm a big Michael Cheika fan as a coach and as a person, so I'll catch up with him and we'll go out for dinner. He's one of those coaches that any time he's in town, I'll always make an effort to go and find him for some food or for a coffee or just hang out. He's a fun person to be around, and he's fiery and passionate, like you see on the TV in those coaches' boxes, throwing things at windows and banging windows and giving out to referees. But I tell you what, we talk about how important Joe Schmidt has been to Irish rugby. Michael Cheika, for me, holds as much of importance as Joe Schmidt, in that he ultimately turned Leinster's fortunes around, and a strong Leinster is important to Irish rugby. So huge credit for him changing the mentality and giving that little bit of grit to the team, and a little bit of finesse as well, to allow us to start the road of European victories in 2009.
You'd imagine they're fairly different characters, Michael Cheika and Joe Schmidt.
They are. I not that I don't get on with Joe, I do, and I meet him occasionally, but I don't know. I think maybe it's because of where he brought us, and the relationship that I have with him. Yeah, I don't know. It's a strange one. He's a super fun guy to be around. Very clever, really good businessman. Good for advice. It happens that I know his wife as well. So anytime we'd be in one country or another, you'd definitely make an effort to catch up.
Good stuff. Well, you can go on to offtheball.com/events if you want to get tickets for that one. That is it for Monday Night Rugby for this evening. Brian O'Driscoll, thanks a million.
Nice one.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.